Minister David Cameron was talking about, oh, I'm really sorry, that's my...
live. Welcome to today's event on breaking the attention barrier when leading a hybrid team. If you're a leader or manager in a workplace nowadays, the chances are at least some of your team work from home some of the time. And that changes the way you lead and that changes the way you communicate. It's put the spotlight on communication skills like never before. Well, by the end of today's event, I'll have given you a framework to think about how you communicate with impact with your team and with the stakeholder community all around you. Because let's face it, we're in a resolutely hybrid world right now. In fact, even immediately prior to the recent Omicron restrictions, Reuters, the news agency, reported that just 60% of British businesses were back at their normal place of work. And in fact, that varies widely across sectors. So in professional services, the Office for National Statistics tells us that figure looks more like 34%. Let's face it, we are all galloping resolutely towards the work-life balance that home working brings. And in fact, a full 85% of adults currently working from home want to keep some form of home working in the mix going into the future. So there's so much to recommend it. But those same people, interestingly, in that same Office for National Statistics report, the same people that want to stay working from home, they are the same people that say, actually, 2 of the casualties of home working are collaborating with the team and communication. So that's the folks who want to stay working from home. And what about if you work in HR? Or what about if you're the leader in the team? There are other issues for you to consider, things like equality of access and diversity of opportunity. And, that's a debate that's been taken up by many folks within the policy side of things. In fact, at an event in December, Catherine Mann, who sits on the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of England, said that there's a very real danger actually of a 2-tier career track emerging. A track for the folks who are present and in the office and a track for the folks who are working from home. And she said, actually, there is a real risk here that this particular move towards hybrid working, the pace at which we've moved towards hybrid working, absolutely has the potential to damage the gender pay gap. So when influential voices like Catherine Mann get involved, well, we need to start to sit up and listen. So if you're joining me today as a HR professional, or if you're leading or managing a team, there's no question that these concerns need to be actively and consciously addressed. Now, today's event is not about policy, but when I was researching for today's event, I came across a really, really fantastic report by the Labour Relations Agency here in Northern Ireland. If you're based within Britain, that's ACAS for you. But there was a fabulous practical guide to hybrid working that the LRA published in October. They always have their fingers on the pulse. They listen with empathy and they always come up with something practical to address current labour market concerns. So that's if policy and deciding on a strategy moving forward, if that's of concern to you, I definitely recommend that you take a look at that report. But for me today, I'm not talking about policy. What I really want to do is I want to talk to you about the practicalities of communicating with your team and how you can overcome some of those challenges that we're all experiencing in a hybrid world. So look, what I'd really love to know from you, if you would drop into the chat for me where you're at on a scale of 1 to 5 in relation to today's event. 1 is, things are working fine. You're working in a hybrid team and you've just got a passing interest in today's event. It's working out okay for you so far. And 5 is, you're speaking to my daily reality. I would love ideas to mix up the communication because there are barriers and there are challenges. So on a scale of 1 to 5, where are you at? If you're not able to access the chat, if you click the subscribe button, it's only subscribers that can access the chat. And by the way, our promise to you is, as a subscriber, that we will publish content that's relevant and interesting to you, and that will be the updates that you will get. So look, with your permission, in today's event, I'll be with you for the next 25 minutes or so, adding value, giving you ideas to problem solve the issues that are blocking your progress in terms of communicating with the team, find out what's really behind someone's resistance to an idea and getting buy-in for your ideas. And at the end of the event, I'd like to share a couple of programs that my company has developed to help teams your teams to work well together. Now, with us on today's live, I think we have Duncan Thompson, Director of Operations at fabulous EdTech provider Learning Pool. Duncan, if you're with us, say hi on the chat. I really want to give a nod to today's event. You've indirectly inspired today's event. It was really when Duncan came to me towards the beginning of the new reality that we were all finding ourselves in, and he said, look, the way that his team had related to one another and to their major stakeholders had completely shifted. And he really wanted to invest in his team and empower them with some new skills to look at how they reacted and communicated with their clients and with their colleagues. So we put together a fantastic program together, a managing business relationships program. And every time we sit with a client, our programs are bespoke and they're tailored to the needs of that particular client environment. So Duncan, you inadvertently inspired what ultimately became one of our most popular programs of last year. And for that, I want to say thank you. So look, to get us under the skin of today's event and to talk about practically how some of the ideas that I am going to introduce to you can work in the current workplace, I'd like to give you 3 case studies of 3 people that I worked with over the course of last year. Now, to protect the innocent, names, job titles, industries, everything has changed. But the fundamental issue that these people were grappling with remains the same. So let me introduce you to Mike. Mike took up a senior role within his organisation, an organisation of around about 1,500 people. He was recruited to be responsible for digital transformation within his company. He reported directly to the Chief Financial Officer. He's in his role about 3 months. He's done his listening exercises, he's done his information gathering, and he's finally ready to present his plan. The problem is, it's been 3 weeks. He's sent the emails. He's had 3 meetings cancelled. The CFO is just not engaging. And Mike is sitting there twiddling his thumbs. How does he get the attention of his senior decision maker? He's starting to take it a bit personally and he's starting to get a bit worried. Listen up to hear how Mike was able to think about using the principles of influence to find a back door to get his CFO's attention. Next up, we have Samira. Samira has really worked hard to build a great relationship with a super demanding client. She leads a team delivering a business critical service for her client in the pharmaceutical industry. And it was coming up to Christmas last year, and her client was refusing to engage with the team's leave plan. The team needed to take time off over the Christmas break. Samira had put that together in good time. And despite repeated requests, her client was refusing to engage. Her client was completely ignoring Samira's request. The problem with that was it was having a big impact on morale in the team, because at least 2 of her team had to turn down travel deals to get away over the Christmas break as a result of not having uncertainty over their work schedule. So this was a really big deal for Samira. She needed to get this client to engage, and they were just sticking their head in the sand and ignoring her. Samira really needed to advocate on behalf of her team with a client that just isn't interested. How's she going to get her attention? And finally, and this may well speak to the needs of many of you, I'd like you to meet Carlos. Carlos has a fabulous team, but there's a know-it-all in the team. And no matter what Carlos says, this know-it-all never wants to change the way that they do things. They're pretty stubborn, they're pretty set in their ways, and it causes problems because the rest of the team get on board and Carlos is stuck back in the dark ages. Carlos's team member is stuck back in the dark ages. What's he going to do about it? Well, let's see. If this really is your world, if you find yourself at least some of the time in a hybrid or remote working environment, if you're managing a team, if you're leading others, and you find yourself talking to the hand, you send out the emails, you drop messages onto the Slack, and nothing comes back, well, I hope there'll be some ideas for you. So look, the problem with communication is the illusion that it's taken place. And that was a quote from George Bernard Shaw a long time ago. But the reality is, just because you have said words, just because you've sent the email, just because you've broadcast your intentions, that does not mean that your words have landed upon listening ears. So to give you a little bit of background to me and where I'm coming from on all of this, I have a background as a stockbroker and a software developer. I have 2 science degrees, and what all that means is I look at the world from a very logical point of view. I just assume that if it makes sense, if it's a good business case, if the return on investment is there, everybody should just get on board with the idea and move forward with it. The reality of the situation is that people are not rational. And no matter how much sense something might seem to make, no matter how urgent something might seem to be, there are often times where you just meet apathy. So I became a little bit nerdy and I started to look a little bit, look at the science behind how we make decisions and how we can influence people. And believe me, there's a lot there. So I've just given you a few of the influencers within this field, within the whole field of behavioural science, behavioural economics, the psychology of influence. And today I'll probably speak to some of the ideas that really the godfather of the psychology of influence, Robert Cialdini, really got behind. I'd really like to introduce some of these ideas and see how they might work for you. So look, before we get started, what I'd really like to say to you is this is all about you exercising your curiosity. So when the emails go out, when you communicate with your team members, when you get nothing back or when you get something different back to what you expected, it's about stepping back and looking with curiosity on that situation. It's about asking the question why. And then here are 6 principles that I hope might help you in your next communication situation. And this comes down to a lot of the research from Cialdini, who's really the godfather of the psychology of influence. And here are the 6 ideas that I hope will help you. First of all, likability. We don't need to talk about that too much. We're all familiar. People do things for people that they like. Let's see how that works within your corporate environment in a moment. Commitment and consistency. If you can get somebody to commit to something in some small way, then they encounter, I suppose, personal pressure to behave in alignment with that particular position. We'll look at that in a moment. Reciprocity. So in other words, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Scarcity. This is the principle that if you're ever maybe on an airline website searching for seats and you see, hurry, 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 2 seats left at this price. That's the principle of scarcity being invoked right there. There's a little bit of pressure on you to get moving because there's only 2 seats left. You need to get to them quickly. Finally, then we've got the penultimate idea there is the idea of authority. And let's face it, in a world of flat corporate hierarchies, you have no authority most of the time. And even if you do have transactional authority over your team, actually winning people's hearts and minds is a far better strategy for moving forward than actually coercion. Finally, social proof. This is the idea that nobody ever gets fired for buying IBM. If you can persuade people that other people have bought into that idea, you know what? That's a really great principle to invoke. So let's look and see how some of these ideas might work for our trio of Mark, Samira and Carlos. So when it comes to Mike, or when it comes to Samira, she had worked really hard to build a relationship with her client. She had been working tremendously hard on the likability factor. She spent a lot of time, she invested a lot of time to take this really challenging client and to bring them with her. But the problem was, for Samira, she was confusing the difference between likability and approachability. So when we sat down and looked at her relationship with her client, really, once we changed the lens, once we changed the frame, and she realised actually that there were times when she needed to flex her communication style between that approachable style and a more authoritative style, she was able to advocate effectively on behalf of her team and to secure the sign-off on the leave schedule that she needed. So really, for her, it was about changing how she looked at her relationship with her client. Likeability isn't about being approachable all the time because in that case, sometimes you can feel like you're being taken advantage of. So it's sometimes about flexing that communication style on a lens between, on a spectrum between approachable and authoritative. That was the game changer for Samira. Commitment and consistency. Now, this one is an interesting one. What happens here, and to describe this one, what I'd really like to do is introduce a little experiment or a little piece of research that was conducted into road traffic safety a number of years ago. Because what happens here is the principle of commitment and consistency is all about, by asking people to commit to something, we can shape their attitude. So a bunch of researchers knocked on the doors of a village, and it was an area where there'd been quite a large frequency of road traffic accidents, fatalities, and sadly people had been injured on the roads around these villages. So the researchers knocked on the door of these particular residents and asked them, would you consider putting up a billboard on your lawn to encourage drivers driving through your village to drive more slowly? Now, it was quite a big billboard. It was 3 feet by 6 feet. And because the request had come out of the blue, understandably, they didn't get a huge take-up on something so intrusive. A week later, the same researchers knocked on the door of a similar village, and they found that they got a take-up that was 4.5 times the take-up of the original researchers. What was the difference between the two groups? Well, the difference was, in the case of the second village, where 3/4 of the population actually complied with the request and put up this ginormous, great big billboard on their lawn, they found that what they had done the week before that was ask them to commit to a bumper sticker. So this was a number of years ago. I think nowadays this would probably be a frame on their Instagram profile or a frame on their Facebook profile. But back in the day, this was asking the residents to stick a small 3-inch high bumper sticker on the rear, at the back of their car, supporting road traffic safety. So in other words, the second lot of villagers had made a commitment towards the principle, and so when the researchers came along and knocked on their door, this was what they attributed the higher compliance rate to. So a small show of commitment from your intended audience may end up reaping large rewards. Let's take a look at what happened when Deborah Haynes, Sky News reporter, came across the principle of commitment and consistency with her young son during lockdown last year.
Minister David Cameron was talking about, oh, I'm really sorry, that's my son arriving.
Me?
Sorry, really embarrassed, sorry.
Sorry.
Hold on 1 second.
Can I
Sorry,
have 2 biscuits?
Yes, you can have 2 biscuits. I'm really sorry about
Yeah,
that.
OK, well, we'll leave Deborah Haynes in full flow there with some family duties, but that's what happens during lockdown and trying to report in lockdown.
In that case, we need to have an uncoerced commitment. So the commitments are best done when they are public, active, and ideally uncoerced. Your boss isn't going to thank you for backing them into a corner in front of everybody else, just like Deborah Haynes' son did right there. And it was last Christmas where a popular restaurant near where I live on the beautiful north coast of Ireland, I saw this article that went viral actually. It hit all of the national headlines. Restaurant begs for decency after 45 no-shows on Saturday night. And it reminded me of a fabulous, fabulous piece of research that was done in the hospitality industry a number of years ago, where the simple act of asking customers when they phoned up to call the restaurant if their plans changed reduced the number of no-shows from 30% to 10% across one particular restaurant chain. A simple question, will you give us a call if your plans change? In other words, the customers were giving a public response. They were committing to the restaurant owner or to the person on the phone, yes, that they would call. It was an active response. They said, yes, we will make a phone call. And it was uncoerced. It was something that they did willingly. So straight away, that increased compliance rates by that huge factor. So commitment and consistency is a principle that absolutely can come into play for you. Reciprocity. This is all about you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours. So for this one, I'd like to make a short nod to the work of Adam Grant, the fabulous US researcher, and his book, Give and Take. Now, Adam Grant, in his book, talks about those folks working in an organisation who are the high achievers. The top 10% of the high achievers demonstrate giving behaviours. In other words, their team members come to them, ask them to do favours, and they willingly give of their time and their expertise to support their team members. Interestingly, the lowest performers in that same company were also givers, were also people who shared that giving behaviour. So what is it that separates the highest performers from the lowest performers? Well, in many cases it was simply a matter of stepping back from the natural humility that we all feel when we offer a favour to somebody, and it was changing the language around that favour. So in other words, the person comes and says, thanks very much for doing that favour, and most of us will go, oh yeah, that's okay. Well, actually a small nod and a small reminder that it didn't come at zero cost to you. It's not that you're rubbing anybody's nose in it, but simply reminding them, yeah, this is all about reciprocity. I've given you my expertise on this occasion, and I suppose in the hope that at some stage somebody else in the team might need your expertise. Oh, that's okay. It's what colleagues do for one another. Small little reminder, that tiny little reminder makes all the difference in terms of somebody valuing the favour that you've done for them. So please be a giver, but make sure that when you are giving, that the person values your time and expertise. It hasn't come for free with you. So reciprocity is another principle of influence that you can use in your workplace. Authority. Now, let's face it, in a world of flat hierarchies, not many of us have a whole lot of authority over those that we need to influence. And really what we're looking at here is, who can you invoke as an authority figure over the people that you need to influence? And that really does come down to the whole world that we're all so familiar with now, the whole world of influencers. Now, I'm not suggesting that Kim Kardashian can help you with your next challenge that you need to grapple with, but certainly the principles of influence were something that helped Mike when he had his challenge getting through to his CFO. Remember, the emails had gone unanswered. He'd had 3 meetings that were cancelled. He just couldn't reach this busy senior member of the team. And so for Mike, he sat back and thought about how could he possibly get into this CFO's inbox? How could he possibly reach across the digital divide? And what he did was he had the opportunity to sit in a meeting with one of the senior leadership team, a peer of his CFO, a peer of his boss. And he mentioned to this other senior leader that as part of his work, he had a particular project that was going to have a very positive impact on this particular leader's team. And so this leader was all ears, wanted to hear more about it, and then ended up relaying that information onto his peer, the CFO, and ultimately that's what brought him to the table. So Mike sat and thought strategically about the influences around him that potentially could have influence over the boss that he wasn't able to get through to. Remember, it was a new boss. Mike was quite new into the team and hadn't had time to build up a personal relationship at this stage, but he knew that others had. So that influencer principle was absolutely what helped him out there. Scarcity. Let's face it, within a corporate environment, within your company environment, it's always going to be about time. So making sure that when you're asking for something, when you're putting a request out there, that folks know that there's a deadline. This isn't something that can just sit there forever. So time is probably the most precious commodity within a company environment. Social proof. Finally, this was how Carlos ended up influencing his resistant team member. And here's the thing, when in conditions of uncertainty, nobody likes change. And over the last 2 years, that's all we've all experienced. All we've experienced has been change. We've been asked to adapt the way that we've worked. We've been asked to quite literally change overnight. 100 years of office working has literally been swept away in the blink of an eye. And so a lot of people are sitting there feeling just a little bit uncertain and a little bit unsure. And the easiest thing to do is to put up the hand and say, no, I would really like to stay with the status quo. And that really, when Carlos thought about it, was what was going on with his team member. So in order to influence his team member to buy into some of the changes that Carlos wanted to put into place, Carlos talked about the impact that these ideas had had on other teams within the business and the positive ways that they were now working with these ideas. And so the idea of social proof really helped Carlos out in that particular situation. So look, forgive me, I've given you a whistle-stop tour of 40 years of behavioural science, behavioural economics, and the psychology of influence inside the space of just under 30 minutes. It's been very quick, it's been very rapid, but If you liked what you heard today and you would like to hear more content like this, well, I would be very keen to work with you, support you, help you, and to develop a program that could help your team to think a little bit differently about their communication challenges. We're running a program today for senior leaders and senior managers to help them to manage and lead hybrid teams. Our Managing Business Relationships program has been very much supportive and helpful of a number of teams throughout the last number of months. And of course, if it's you yourself personally interested in developing yourself and your skills, your speaking skills and your influencing skills, if you would like to have influence over the audiences that need to know you, well, it would be my great privilege to work with you on my Speakeasy public speaking and video presenting program. If any of this has been of interest to you, reach out. You can connect with us through our YouTube channel here, or you can absolutely connect with us on our website, which is shown right here beside me, bespokecoms.net. I would love to have a virtual coffee with you to find out more about your needs, to see if there's something there that we could support you with. Thank you so much for your time today. My commitment to you is, as always, to get you in and out within the 30 minutes. So if there's anything there that you'd like to engage with, I would love to hear from you. Connect with me on LinkedIn, find out more on bespokecoms.net. I very much look forward to hearing from you. Have a great day.